Greetings folks, this is Wrongways Gamgee and welcome to Quick and Dirty Roleplaying. In this video, I'll talk about the tactical agenda versus the creative agenda when it comes to tabletop role-playing game combat. Just to be transparent, I'm going to essentially, but not entirely, regurgitate the subject matter as presented by Derek from Knights of Last Call, specifically from livestream number 160. The link to the episode is in the description, although they talk about more than just the tactical agenda versus the creative agenda. Anyways, onward. In tabletop role-playing games, combat is typically a high-stakes, winner-take-all situation. The players want their PCs to win, and to do so, they need to defeat their foes. If they lose to them, oftentimes, they die. Because we've been conditioned to play out tabletop role-playing game combat as life or death scenarios due to the wargaming roots of the hobby. Because of these wargaming roots, combat in many TTRPGs plays like a wargame, specifically a skirmish grid-based board game. This approach to combat can be referred to as the tactical agenda. For players to win via the tactical agenda, they must know the rules of combat, know how their characters work in combat, know how to work together as a team in combat, play the combat game with sufficient expertise, and be sufficiently lucky due to dice rolling. The combat rules in a wargame tell you what you can do, how you can do it, and what's not allowed, most often through implication, but at times explicitly for the sake of clarification and specificity. Characters will invariably have special abilities that they can perform in combat, and these abilities will have rules as to what they do and what their limitations are. Regardless of how logical or cool it may be to use a particular ability for a purpose that falls outside of its game mechanics, to use an ability in a way that does not conform to the rules is antithetical to the tactical combat agenda. The players have to work with what they've got. If the GM rewards players that attempt to do things that are outside the bounds of the rules and game mechanics, they are sacrificing the tactical agenda for the sake of the creative agenda. The combat minigame becomes a lot less compelling as a result. On the other hand, the strict adherence to sticking to the rules of combat can lead to a stifling of lateral thinking. The satisfaction of playing games with a tactical agenda comes from attempting to figure out not only how to win, but how to do it well. Satisfaction may even be derived from defeat, since defeat provides learning opportunities to apply to future iterations of the combat minigame. The tactical agenda is fundamentally opposed to the essence of the tabletop role-playing games, which can be summed up with the following statement. Your character can try to do anything within their capabilities. Instead, the ethos of the tactical agenda is, if the rules don't say you can do it, then you can't. The tactical agenda works perfectly fine in competitive games, whether they're board games, card games, sports, etc. However, tabletop role-playing games are different in this regard because since their inception, it has become a norm to modify or disregard rules in case-by-case situations for the sake of fun or for the sake of telling a particular story. When this disregard for the rules or outcomes on a case-by-case basis occurs in games that promote the tactical agenda, it renders the activity pointless because the group is not abiding by the rules of the game, and by extension, they are not playing the game. They're playing some variation of the game. As mentioned prior, the creative agenda runs counter to the tactical agenda by undermining it. Rule 0 is a creative agenda game mechanic, which makes it explicit that the GM can make a ruling to override the rules in the instance where the rules get in the way of an outcome that ... fill in the blank. Though not many would like to admit it, the creative agenda is very often motivated by desperation. Players may enjoy the tactical agenda when things go their way in combat. When the tide turns against them, watch as they attempt to negotiate with the GM so that they can use their PC's abilities or certain game mechanics in ways that are not in accordance to how they are written, nor, at times, in accordance to how they are intended so that they can win, or at least not lose. As a personal example of this, there was a time when I was playing a 9th level paladin named Humphrey LaPont in my first AD&D campaign back in high school, and Humphrey was at the top of a tower fighting his nemesis, Lycos, the lycanthrope anti-paladin, who was 15th level. Lycos was whooping Humphrey's ass, and when Humphrey was low on HP and it was my turn, I told the DM that Humphrey is going to carefully move towards the edge of the tower, and when Lycos charges at him, he was going to stop, drop, and roll in an attempt to trip Lycos off of the tower's edge. That sort of situation was not accounted for in the rules. So I think my DM rolled either against Humphrey's dexterity score or his wisdom score. We played over the phone, which is why he made the dice roll. The roll was a success, so Lycos charged at Humphrey. Humphrey lunges to the prone position with his body perpendicular to Lycos and rolls forward, causing Lycos' foot to collide into Humphrey's chest mid-charge, which trips Lycos going forward and falling off the ledge of the tower. It wasn't a very heroic way of getting the win, but Lycos was considerably stronger than Humphrey, so I got desperate and played dirty. Combat rules be damned. Fortunately, in that regard, AD&D is very grabastic when it comes to rules consistency, so the DM was okay with my proposal. Whereas system mastery is required to maximize your chances of victory in the tactical agenda, rhetorical skill is required to maximize your chances of victory in the creative agenda. Because the goal of the creative agenda is for the players to figure out how to convince the GM that their PC's abilities do exactly what they want. Many tabletop role-playing games have game mechanics that allow the PCs to do things that are beyond the capabilities provided to them by the rules of the game and their abilities. These mechanics undermine the rules and games mechanics that adhere to the tactical agenda by granting the players the ability to selectively ignore their PC's limitations or to have limited forms of authorial control. In other words, they allow players to get creative. Oftentimes, games that are upfront with their adherence to the creative agenda will either have relatively shallow rules for combat or will roll combat in to their conflict minigame. In these games, combat is just like any other conflict or dramatic scene, which helps keep the flow of the narrative going rather than having that jarring experience of leaving narrative mode to go into board game mode and then leaving board game mode to go back into narrative mode. The satisfaction of playing games with the creative agenda comes from engaging with a shared imagined space, doing things that can't be done in the real world, and having compelling story building experiences emerge as the result. Basically, once the session ends, the group leaves with memories of events that are completely fictional, but still emotionally impactful and, hopefully, satisfying. Well, also hopefully emotionally impactful. Tactical games that have ad hoc alternative game mechanics that allow the players to get creative, but actually provide options that are inferior to the abilities or game mechanics already established by the current rules, are dishonest about supporting creative play. Once the players learn that sticking to the rules and game mechanics already in play provide more favorable outcomes than trying to ignore them over some cockamamie plan, or even a slightly unorthodox non-meta plan, they have been successfully trained into playing within the boundaries of the rules of the combat minigame. Mother May I is a term used to specifically denigrate the negotiation aspect of the creative agenda and is often used to disparage games that primarily abide by the creative agenda. Granted, it does take rhetorical skill and a purpose in mind to produce elegant negotiation, so I can understand the frustration of dealing with successive, muddled follow-up questions. However, The very act of negotiating to attempt some sort of creative strategy is at the very heart of the essence of role-playing games. I want my character to try so-and-so, and because they are X, or have X, I think the attempt is justified. Or, I'm willing to go above and beyond by paying or sacrificing X in order to accomplish my objective. The Devil's Bargain from Blades in the Dark. Speaking of Blades in the Dark, that game attempts to take the creative space of possibility and map it onto a position and effect matrix. The GM converts the ability or skill the player states their PC is using to accomplish their intent into one of 25 position effect combinations. On the position axis, you have risky, desperate, controlled, auto-fail, and auto-succeed. On the effect axis, you have no effect, minor, standard, major, and extreme. This position and effect matrix is the way Blades in the Dark replaces the tactical agenda with a mechanical framework of providing the GM the means of following the creative agenda in a structured manner. While this framework does provide a way for GMs to apply game mechanics to pretty much any challenge, it's not a tactically deep system by any means. As I mentioned before, rhetorical skill is what will help you get the most favorable position and the most potent effect possible within the current circumstances of the scene in question. At some point in livestream number 160, a live chat popped up stating, more or less, that a robust rule set with lots of systems is needed to accommodate both the tacticians and the creatives, so to speak. To which Derek responded, the siren call of the simulationist. Derek then went on to state that true simulationism is, in some sense, an attempt to marry the tactical and creative agendas together. By attempting to have a rule for just about everything possible within a particular game, the goal is to be able to do just about anything and have rules or game mechanics that support whatever endeavor the player wants their character to attempt. Derek then brought up an area that runs contrary to simulationism. Game mechanics that have no corollary within the simulation, such as feats found in D&D, metagame resources that allow for ability use, etc. Since these are non-diegetic in nature, what do these things mean within the game world? Which is supposed to be the context of the robust mechanical representation of the fiction. My reasons for not being convinced that simulationism is the answer to the tactical creative divide are more layman in nature. For instance, I think attempting to implement as accurate of a simulation as possible in every circumstance requires not only a massive amount of rules that don't contradict with each other, but a considerable amount of time during the session to ensure that every situation that occurs within the session is accounted for by the rules, which kills momentum and pacing. If you happen to be a savant and can pull this off, more power to you, but that makes you an exception, not the rule. Also, the ratio of folks who have a strong noetic appreciation of verisimilitude to folks that are willing to handwave hardcore simulation for the sake of pacing in a tactically satisfying or narratively satisfying combat is incredibly small, I would think. The time and effort necessary to satisfy the former over the latter is highly time inefficient. For most folks, the simulationist juice is just not worth the squeeze. Another objection that I have is that attempting to implement as accurate of a simulation as possible in every circumstance is a quick way to induce GM burnout. It's an even quicker way for the GM to abandon the rule set and default back to the creative agenda. Tell me what you want to do, and I'll tell you what to roll. Trust me to adjudicate the results so that a reasonable outcome occurs. This has been done ever since the days of Kriegspiel, where the referee, typically a high-ranking military officer, would use their expertise in warfare to intuitively determine the feasibility and odds of success of the myriad tactical decisions made by the players. All in all, both agendas have their place in gaming, and they're both simply different approaches to how folks approach the structured make-believe hobby. And that pretty much concludes my video about the tactical agenda versus creative agenda in TTRPG combat. It was an incredibly interesting topic that came over an hour within the live stream, and I wanted to dedicate a video solely to it for ease of reference and for further discussion with you, the viewer. Remember to keep those comments respectful and relevant, and click the thumbs up if you like this video. With that being said, take care and play to find out what happens.